My name is Licky Abrams, and I'm one of the proud supporters of Z3. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to see all of you. I'm going to ask you to turn off your phones so that we are not interrupted. And I'm about to introduce our speaker. For that, I need glasses. So this is the Israel tribes and their Jewish identity crisis. Is each of the different Jewish tribes in Israel today in the most midst of an identity crisis? This session will examine the reasons for why this may be and present two opposing but complementary frameworks for self-understanding that are defining Jewish identity in Israel anew. Dr. Tomer Persico is the inaugural Shalom Hartman Scholar in Residence in the Bay Area in conjunction with the academic position as Koret Visiting Assistant Professor of Jewish and Israel Studies at UC Berkeley. Tomer's field of academic study are contemporary spirituality, Jewish renewal, and trends of secularization and religiosity. Religiosity in Israel. He is an activist for freedom of religion in Israel, writes the most popular blog in Hebrew on religion, as well as an English blog, and has written hundreds of articles on those subjects for those popular media. Tomer holds an MA in comparative religion from the Hebrew University, and a PhD in comparative religion from Tel Aviv University. For the last 8 years, he has taught in the Department for Comparative Religion in Tel Aviv University. His book, The Jewish Meditative Tradition, was published in Tel Aviv University Press 2016.
Great.
Tomer.
Thank you. Oh, I have a little one.
Okay.
Thank you for coming here, and I'm very glad to be here. Is there a Jewish identity crisis within the three major tribes of the Israeli society? I will say yes, there is. And I'm talking about, when I say tribes, I'm talking about the secular tribe, the Zionist religious tribe, and the ultra-Orthodox tribe. I will not talk today about the traditionals, the Masortiim, only those three tribes which are self-proclaimed and self-conscious as tribes. They, I will say, are in the midst of a Jewish identity crisis. And I will show first evidence for this. These are bits of news that I have collected from only the last 2 weeks. This is just the last 2 weeks. We have the Knesset legal council saying that the law should allow weddings, chuppahs, conducted in private to be registered in the states, in the state official listings. So that's Orthodox chuppahs being conducted outside of the chief rabbinate. Now, why is that a sign of an identity crisis? Because more and more of these are being conducted, even though they are not, until now, listed in the formal registration. More and more Israelis, both secular and religious Zionists, do not want to go to the chief rabbinate and go through its official functions. And that would have been unheard of even 30 years ago, not to say 50 years ago. When the Israeli state was founded, it was clear to 90-something% of secular Jews, I'm not talking about religious of course, secular Jews, that when you want to get married, you go to the chief rabbinate. They will provide you with a kosher Jewish wedding. Things have changed. It's no longer that way. Their Jewishness is conceived by them as different, and they don't need nor want the chief rabbinate. So that's one example. Another example, these are the results of the last elections for mayor of Jerusalem. These are the votes for Moshe Leon. These are the votes for Ofer Berkovich. Berkovich was the secular contendant. In Jerusalem, The Arabs, unfortunately, do not vote. We have only the Jewish population which votes. And out of that population, 30 to 35% are ultra-Orthodox. And only 20% are secular. So without going into further complexities, it is clear that in order for Ofer Berkovich to get almost 50%, he got 49.15%, and Moshe Leon got 50.85%. The margin was a few thousands of votes. In order for that to be the margin, a lot of ultra-Orthodox Jews had to either not vote at all, stay at home, or to actually vote for the secular contendant, Ofer Berkovich. How is it possible that ultra-Orthodox will defy their rabbis and vote for a secular contender? That's another sign of a Jewish identity crisis, this time in the ultra-Orthodox camp. And the last example is a news story about Netanyahu trying to apparently bribe the head of Walla news portal in Israel. And this is a bit talking about how Netanyahu asked him to print a story about Bennett, Naftali Bennett's wife. Bennett is the leader of the Jewish Home Party, which is the continuation of the Mafdal, the Zionist religious party in Israel. He is asking the editor of Walla to print a story about how Bennett's wife was a conditor, was a chef at a restaurant that served non-kosher dishes. Now, leaving all that, ickiness alone, what's the crisis here? The crisis here is that even though Netanyahu may think that this matters for Bennett's electorate, it does not matter in the least bit. Here, it's now common knowledge that his wife was indeed a chef at a non-kosher restaurant. Nobody cares. I'll say further than that, nobody even cares that Bennett himself is not religious, not really religious. We have a joke in Israel, in the religious Zionist circles in Israel, there's a joke. How religious are you from 10 to Bennett? Right? Bennett is the zero, right? But he's not religious. But it doesn't matter. He's the head of the Zionist religious party. He's totally accepted. And this, again, shows that something has changed in the National Religious Party, in their conception of how they define their Judaism. So what has changed? I will start with the ultra-Orthodox crisis of identity. This is the ultra-Orthodox public in Israel. This is the inner divisions. There are Lithuanians, Mitnagdim, 40%. We have 34% Hasidim. We have 22% Sephardim. This is the Shas party. And others, 4%. All of these different parts of the ultra-Orthodox public have their own leadership. But something is changing, and I will say how. This is a graph about fertility rates of the Israeli public. These are Haredim, ultra-Orthodox, and these are the rest, right? We have religious, and then we have secular. Obviously, the Haredim are having much more children than all the others. Here it says Haredim have in average 6.91 children, religious 4.22, and secular 2.14. So obviously, the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox population has to grow all the time in proportion to other Jewish population in Israel, right? Obviously. But according to the Central Bureau of Statistics, at least since 2008 to 2014, the ultra-Orthodox population has not grown. You can see it's growing from 1990, only 3% of Jews in Israel. That's amazing that was the ratio in 1990. It has grown to 2000 to 5%, 2008 9%, and 2014 still 9%. They're not having fewer babies, at least generally. So what's happening here? I'll give you another interesting piece of data. This is ultra-Orthodox voting. This is how many seats in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament, the ultra-Orthodox parties got since 92. Let's go here. You see, this is June 92. Yadut HaTorah got 4 seats. Okay? May 96, Yadut HaTorah got 4 seats. May 99, 5. January 03 elections, 5. March 06 elections, 6. February 09 elections, 5. January 13 elections, 7. And March 15 elections, 6. So there's a sort of a fluctuation here. Certainly there is no real growth in the ultra-Orthodox party's seats in the Knesset. What's happening here? I mean, if the ultra-Orthodox population would have grown really twice as fast as the secular population, or maybe even 3 times as fast as the secular population, obviously, ratio speaking, the number of seats in the Knesset should have also grown. But it's not really growing. Something here is strange. Now what? And if we move from data to really a sociological view of the ultra-Orthodox public, I brought here the state of its leadership. We talked before, I showed you that the ultra-Orthodox public is made out of 3 significant parts. There's the Sfaradim, there's the Lithuanians or Mitnagdim, and there's the Hasidim. The Hasidic public has its own rabbis. Each Hasidic court, as it were, has its own leader, its own rabbi. So the Mir Hasidism has its own leader, the Gur, the Belz, etc. They all have, just like the Lubavitcher rabbi is the rabbi of the Chabad Hasidim, right? But what about the other 2 major parts of the ultra-Orthodox public? Well, let's see. Until the year 2001, the major and most significant and very important leader of the Lithuanian, the 40% of the Haredim, Lithuanian public was Rabbi Eliezer Menachem Man Shach. Rabbi Shach, right? And you must have heard his name. He was all over the news in the 80s, and he was a very formidable leader. And he died in 1901. He really set the agenda for the ultra-Orthodox party in its entirety. And that agenda was anti-secular, anti-Zionist, or at least a-Zionist, and really derogatory towards the secular public. In 201, Rabbi Yosef Shalom Eliashiv gains the throne. He is put as the leader of the Lithuanian, Mitnagdim, Haredi public. He is less of an activist, less of a thinker, less of a forceful leader, but he still holds the ship together. He dies in 2012. He is replaced by Rabbi Aaron Leib Steinman. Okay? Steinman is, again, a bit less of a significant leader, but he holds the public together, and he makes a lot of decisions for the entire ultra-Orthodox party, public. What happened in 2017? He dies, and there is no replacement. There are 2 sort of contenders, or people who are talked about as the sort of big chief rabbi of the ultra-Orthodox Lithuanian public now. They are Rabbi Edelstein and Rabbi Kanievsky, but none of them is formally throned as the next leader of the ultra-Orthodox, or at least of the Lithuanian public. There today is no Gdol Ador. And this, I propose, is unheard of. Unheard of, at least since the 20th century, since the middle of the 20th century. There was one significant rabbi who the public coalesced around. Now again, think about how strange this is. How difficult would it have been to install some titular figure just for the show? Just for so we can say, oh, this is our great rabbi, whatever, and the people around him will actually, of course, run the show, as it is usually the case anyway. But even then, even that, the ultra-Orthodox public today has not been able to do. And this crisis of leadership is again symptomatic of a crisis of identity. There is not enough unity. There is not enough clear agenda for the ultra-Orthodox public today to form or to express a unified leadership. Now, something similar is happening with the Sephardi ultra-Orthodox public. It was represented and is still represented politically by the Shas party, right? You've heard of it probably. And the head of the Shas party, founded the Shas party, the spiritual leader of the Shas party was Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, right? He was indeed a great rabbi and led his public in dire straits and in better times. But he died in 2013. And again, here there is no replacement. Now here we do have a titular figure. We have this Rabbi Shalom Cohen, who is apparently or supposed to be the leader now of the Sephardic public, but nobody really takes him seriously. He has not a fraction of the popularity or the authority that Rabbi Ovadia Yosef has. And again, this deep crisis of leadership is reflective of a crisis that is much broader, of people who are, of a public that is no longer unified, of a public that now has a different way of thinking and of living and can just not be united under one figure. And what happens when such a reality is the case is that we have a lot of different voices that are now heard for the first time. We have a lot of different expressions of ultra-Orthodoxy that were never there before. I've brought here three examples, right? Enlisting in the IDF is no longer a scourge in ultra-Orthodox society. So there are more and more ultra-Orthodox soldiers in the IDF. They get their special conditions, and the IDF is very forthcoming towards them, etc. But this is still a significant phenomenon when ultra-Orthodox are enlisting in the army, and even their society, their neighborhoods, their families, their communities are more and more accepting of that, something, again, that would be unheard of. We have more and more ultra-Orthodox in universities, learning for bachelor's degree, learning for master's degree, in order, of course, to get out and work in the Israeli market. Again, a development that was simply not there 20 years ago, even less. More and more ultra-Orthodox that want a profession that is not within their community's bounds. So you're not going to be a writer of Torah scrolls or a moyel for circumcision. You're going to be an engineer, you're going to be in high tech, etc. Finally, this bubbling of the ultra-Orthodox public is also manifested as a feminist movement inside the ultra-Orthodox public. So it's not always called feminism, and it won't always admit that it is, but it's women, activists, ultra-Orthodox, that are fighting for voting rights. Voting rights, I mean, and I don't mean voting rights, I mean election rights. So meaning they want female ultra-Orthodox to be represented in the Knesset. For the ultra-Orthodox political parties not to be represented only by male ultra-Orthodox. So there's that, there's they are again, like their male counterparts, engaging in careers that 20 years ago were not thinkable, etc. And really, if we go down to the basics, what are we talking about when we're talking about the ultra-Orthodox crisis? The reasons are really, again, reflective of the result. First reason for it, I would say, is growth. The ultra-Orthodox public is growing. But as it is growing, its margins are widening. Wider margins mean more flexibility, mean more givun, how do you say? Diversity, thank you. Because the smaller a public is, the easier it is to control it. The easier it is to set it one agenda. The more it grows, the harder it is, and there is more diversity. So first of all, simply growth. Then, nationalism. The ultra-Orthodox public is becoming more nationalist. Now, in many ways, it's first of all becoming simply more Zionist. It won't say it's Zionist, it won't declare it's Zionist, but it's pro the state of Israel, it's very much identified with it, it's patriotic, it very much is against the enemy, however they will define it. And this sort of process of Israelization is inevitably a process of un-ultra-Orthodoxation, because you become an Israeli that is ultra-Orthodox. You are no longer simply ultra-Orthodox, and that's something else completely. And finally, secularization. Secularization meaning here simply the more exposure to the outer world. Rabbis have completely lost the battle against internet. Almost every grown ultra-Orthodox, or at least a large part, I would say, certainly the majority, have a mobile phone that can access internet that is not allowed officially by the rabbis.
Kosher phones?
There are kosher phones, but they will have two phones. They will have the kosher phone and the other phone for working. But the thing is really that you need it in order to work, in order to get by today in modern world. So you have it already, and then you can access a lot of information that before you could not. And this brings with it some secularization. So these are the three reasons I would say for what I call the ultra-Orthodox identity crisis, their Jewish identity crisis. Their Jewish identity is changing. Let's go now to the religious Zionist identity crisis. And I really take Bennett as the emblematic figure of it, because Bennett, being the head of the ultra-Orthodox religious Zionist party, these are the last four heads of the religious Zionist party: Yitzhak Levi, Efi Eitam, Zvulun Orlev, and Daniel Hershkovitz. Compared to them, Naftali Bennett knows a lot less about Jewish tradition and halakha, and observes a lot less of Jewish tradition and halakha. And I mean, Yitzhak Levi was a rabbi, but even all the others were, as we say, Bnei Torah. They learned in yeshivas. They were suffused by halakha as they were growing up. Bennett is different that way. He comes from the high-tech industry. He comes from a conservative minyan in Haifa, which his family belonged to for a while. It's something else. Now, the fact that Bennett is today the head of the National Religious Party, and by the way, his deputy is a totally secular woman, Ayelet Shaked, the fact that that's the face of the religious Zionist party says something. It tells us something about their own religious Jewish identity. Now, what does it say? What does it tell us? I will propose it tells us that they too, like the ultra-Orthodox, are becoming more nationalistic. Now, what does that mean here? That means that their identity as nationalist Israelis, or their national identity, is becoming more accentuated, is becoming simply more important to them as a basis for their Jewish identity than their identity as halachic Orthodox observers. So for them, the most important thing in their Jewishness would be their, and here it is, patriotism, right-wingness, sort of hawkiness on Israeli issues. And you can know that when you ask in interviews children of this public who have left the observance of mitzvot. And they will say, yes, my parents of course are not satisfied with me, or they're not happy that I have left observing the halakha. But they would have been much more, they would grieve much more, they would be angry much more if I had become left-winged. right? That would have been a real break with my tribe. So here the center of weight, the point of demarcation is your sort of right-wingness and not your halachic observance. And this is where Bennett comes in. He is more right-wing than he is an Orthodox Jew. And indeed, today in the National Religious Party, in the Religious Zionist Party, you will not find an observant left-wing Jew. You will find a non-observant right-wing Jew, as Ayelet Shaked or in Bennett a bit. So something here is changing in their Jewish identity. And with that change comes, again, a lot of different voices that are asserting themselves. We've got, on the extreme left, Noar HaGvaot, the hilltop youth, we call them in Israel. These are anti-establishment, right-winged hippies, I would say, living in illegal outposts in the Judea and Samaria, and really not identifying neither with the religious Zionist public, and sometimes not even with the Israeli state. Sometimes they would say the state has to be torn down. And that's a voice we didn't have before, not at that numbers anyway. We have Orthodox feminism in numbers and in influence that we had never before. Egalitarian minions and people and women who study halakha and decree halakha decrees. Again, something that 20 years ago would never have happened. These are logos of 4 different LGBT Zionist religious movements. So these are openly gay Zionist religious united in sort of these organizations. Again, something that 20 years ago we would not have even dreamed of. We have people not or fully observing the halakha and being a bit open about it. This is Shabbat Shalom, Era. This is Shabbat Shalom, are you awake? SMSing or texting in Shabbat, in Sabbath, right? People who consider themselves and openly say they are Orthodox light. Again, something that is totally new. And finally, the emerging activity around the Temple Mount, ascending the Temple Mount, the talk about building the temple. It's another thing that we didn't have in the religious Zionist public until even a decade ago, certainly in the numbers that we have it now. Something is happening there. There is a new direction to their religiosity. So all that is symptomatic of the identity crisis of the religious Zionists. I don't want to take up, I just want to follow the time. Okay. And I would say the reasons are, first of all, for this crisis are, first of all, post-Cookism. Cookism, the lore, the ethos that Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Cook gave religious Zionism that talked about bringing the Messiah through settling on the land of Israel, especially in Judea and Samaria. Cookism has basically fractured and collapsed as an organized living ideology. There is no more waiting for the Messiah. There is no more waiting for the seculars to become religious. There is no, I mean, I'm talking about in real numbers of people. Of course, there are a few people who still wait. And there are no more this talk that withdrawals from the land of Israel are impossible, which was very much the talk 30 years ago. They know now that today withdrawals are possible. And Cookism so has fractured as a living ideology. And after it has fractured, different voices can arise and create themselves. And again, hyper-nationalism, I would say, the nationalistic angle of the identity replaces the religious, replaces the halachic as the main axis of the identity. And now the secular Zionist. Well, okay. And the secular Zionist identity crisis, I want to show two major manifestations of. First is the Jewish Renaissance. The Jewish Renaissance is what we call for this awakening of Jewish expression within the secular Israeli Jewish public. People are more and more engaged with their Judaism in many different ways. They are in prayer circles. They are learning in any number of sort of pluralistic Batei Midrash, pluralistic centers of learning Talmud, learning about the tradition. They are in any different number of the sort of contemporary spirituality, New Age expressions of Judaism, like learning Kabbalah or becoming Breslev Hasids, or sort of this neo-Hasidism, which you are on the verge of becoming a Hasid but don't ever. They are going to big Kabbalat Shabbat, big Friday evening happening, greeting the Shabbat with musical instruments and sort of this lightheaded sort of atmosphere, which again was not there 20, 30 years ago, and different expressions of sort of new Jewish New Age, like this Yemima movement, are sprouting up. Parallel to that, you have a different approach towards the Israeli religious establishment. Right, as written here, 60% of Jewish Israelis want a possibility to get married outside of the chief rabbinate. And more and more of them do actually get married outside, even though it will mean that they are not listed officially as married. And there are organizations who officiate such weddings, who organize weddings outside of the chief rabbinate, and they are getting more and more popular. So the automatic acceptance of the authority of the chief rabbinate in Israel, that was, even in secular circles, pretty obvious, is no longer so, and this is changing. So one avenue of expression that manifests this identity crisis of the Jewish secular public is this pluralistic, liberal expressions of Judaism, either New Age, spiritual Judaism, or intellectual, cultural Judaism. These are individualistic paths in which secular Jews fashion their own Judaism as if anew. Parallel to that, opposite, but I would say also complementary, we have Jewish ethno-nationalism. I won't go now to Elor Azaria's trial because it's too long to get into it, but I will bring you this picture. This is a picture I took in Shuk Machane Yehuda, in the Machane Yehuda market in Jerusalem. This is a person walking. He has a flag with the symbol of the temple. He has a shirt with Rabbi Meir Kahana here. He has a Golani beret. And he has a tape, sort of a ghetto blaster, that plays the Tikva in rap version, sung by what in Israel a singer known as the Shadow, Hatzel, which is a very nationalistic sort of ultra-nationalistic singer, rapper. What we see here is use of religious symbolism in order to enforce nationalism. This person is not religious. He uses the temple, he uses Rabbi Meir Kahana, he uses other symbols like the Star of David to assert his nationalism. And this is another, I would say, avenue that the crisis in secular circles is going to. Ethno-nationalism, meaning that the basic building block of Israel has to be the Jewish, or the Jew, the part of the Jewish ethnicity, and not the citizen, which is, of course, a much more universal concept. And why? Again, I will say why. What I would have as the reason for this secular identity crisis really, I hate to make this so short, but I will have to make this simplified. Basically, the demise of this Jewish identity. This is the Jewish identity provided by the secular Zionist movement that founded the State of Israel. They called it the Hebrew, right? Ivri. It's not even a Jew, it's a Hebrew, it's a new Jew, it's a national Jew, it's a healthy Jew because he's physical, he's connected to the ground, he is building here a model society based on the values of the prophets, but also, of course, on socialism. It's an egalitarian society, it's a model for the nations. It's this guy and this girl, this lady, right, which will be the new Jew. And this whole concept, this whole new mid-20th century Jewish identity has again collapsed with classical Zionism. This is no longer something that people are identified with or looking to be their role models. This answer to the question, how am I Jewish, is gone. For secular Jews, I'm talking about. And when this answer is gone, other answers have to be fashioned. Some in pluralistic Batei Midrash, in pluralistic places of learning tradition, some in New Age forms of Judaism, and some in ethno-nationalism. New answers of how it is to be Jewish. How am I Jewish? So, the reasons for the secular identity crisis basically is the demise of the Hebrew, I would say, and of course, and again, this is almost a truism, individualism. And then the quest for a relevant Jewish identity goes to these two avenues, as I just said. To finish off, to cap off, really, we have a lot today of different options for being a Jew in Israel. There's a lot of different ways and novel ways to define your Jewish identity. The collapse of the old structures of meaning and identity in ultra-Orthodox public, in the Zionist religious public, and in the secular Zionist public have created a field in which really multiplicity and diversity can thrive. And every Jew can reconstruct or construct for him or herself a new Jewish identity. That poses, I would say, great opportunities if there will be an answer that can take so many people that are seeking an answer to take them in a positive direction. I think that would be a very great contribution. And now I will open for some Q&A. Please. Yes, please.
Quick question.
I think
if I may, just
yeah,
we are recording, so if the question isn't presented to the microphone, the question wasn't made. So if you could please be patient, raise your hand, we'll come around with the microphone so you can pose the question to the recording. Thank you.
it's not a very important presentation, so.
What is the significance or the consequences of not being registered? Although you are, quote, married, what does it mean?
Israel has the best common law marriage clause in the West. People who are not married officially are common law married, right? And they get 90-something% of the rights and the privileges that married. So it's not a big deal, though it's missing is the opportunity to adopt children. Sometimes cases of inheritance sometimes can be a bit tricky. And of course, if you're going abroad, other states don't recognize the fact that you have a spouse, you need to prove it, etc. So it's these little things, not so bad. Right, yeah.
The word.
What? Yeah.
The word nationalism in the United States has become very difficult, as you're obviously aware from your smile.
Yeah.
Because it's being turned around in some ways and echoing some very frightening things from what happened in Europe, both in the Second World War and before the First World War. But it really does have an identity that most Americans identify with, certainly as Jews. We first think of ourselves as Americans and then as Jews. In Israel, you're talking about the word nationalism over and over again. How is it the same or different in Israel?
Thanks. That's a great question. Of course, nationalism in Israel is different, first of all, because it has an inherent connection to the ethnos, to the ethnic group. Jews, apart from being a religion, apart from being maybe a nationality, are an ethnic group. That's what they were in Europe before modernity, before the emancipation. And there is this ethnic base that can be brought up to the fore very easily. Now, I don't think that nationalism is inherently a bad thing at all. Nation states are all over the world, and that's not the case. But what I was trying to point out here is this switch from being a nationalist, meaning I love my country and I want to cooperate with its citizens, to being an ethno-nationalist, which means I love my tribal group, my ethnic group, my inner, my ethnic-centered group, and I want to cooperate only with members of that group. And I think citizens in my own country from other groups are not to be given same rights. Maybe they should be opposed. Maybe they should be blocked in certain areas, etc. That's the difference. And I think in the US, because of the way society is built here, it's impossible even to think that. Right? Yeah.
You describe the tribes almost if they were equal, right? From size perspective.
Okay.
Right, which is obviously
No,
not, because secular is much bigger than any other.
Of course.
But it can be sounded as there is a lot of pluralism in type of Judaism, which is almost like denomination, but it's not. And I'm just wondering, like, how much of the concept of hadata, right, where some groups are forcing others,
Right.
is in a way also giving the people who are more religious a way to come to the mainstream, because the mainstream actually moved a lot to more orthodox way.
Okay, so to address both parts of your question, first of all, of course, the secular public is much bigger than the Zionist religious and the ultra-Orthodox, and thus its movement or parts, or it's the movement of parts of it towards more traditionalism, towards more interest in tradition, or participating in Jewish textual study, or celebrating holidays in any number of ways. All that has made the entire of the Israeli Jewish population more traditional. It's a bit closer to traditional than it was, let's say, 30 years ago. And then the second part of your question was about the Hadata, and what about it? How
the Hadata is actually helping. I mean, in a way, it's making you feel like there is more unification mainstream, but it actually was made because you are being forced to participate more.
Yeah, but then a lot of Jews would like to participate more. A lot of secular Jews anyway. I would say that the move towards more tradition has made some secular Jews very apprehensive of forcing them to be more religious, some of it justifiedly, some of it not, in my perspective. And then we have the activism that we didn't have before of sort of this militant secularism that opposes Hadata, opposes forcing or religious coercion, really.
Hi there.
Yeah.
Can you hear? I wanted to know why this fast change in religious identities, why are you characterizing it as a crisis? I saw so many positive things, and I associate crisis with like wringing our hands and trying to figure out what we're going to do about it right now.
Oh, yeah. There are a lot of positive developments from this crisis, as I say. I call it a crisis because the old structures have crumbled. The old structures have been broken down, and there is a search for something new. That's why it's a crisis. But of course, every crisis is also an opportunity, and this search for something new sometimes brings great things, at least in my opinion. So it's a crisis just in the matter of what was old is not continuing. What was is now over, and we are at a new stage. That's the reason.
Can you talk about the occupation and security through the lens of these three tribes?
Through the lens of the identity crisis, maybe. I would just say that it's a good question. It's connected because the rise and fall of the Oslo process, let's say, when the 90s, the first half of the 90s were very, I would say, very secular and very liberal-oriented and optimistic that such a trajectory will continue with the Oslo process. And when the Oslo process basically broke down, the Second Intifada, etc., what happened is that people both took a step back from this sort of secular, pluralistic, liberal trajectory, and also the fact that this struggle, this national struggle between the Israelis and the Palestinians is about Judea and Samaria, and the fact that the religious Zionist public and settlers maybe take care to accentuate that this is the land of our forefathers, the promised land, the land that Abraham walked on, etc., also raised, I would say, this raised to the fore this Jewish connection and allowed for people more to identify with parts of tradition. And this is also a source for what I refer to as ethno-nationalism in the end. So these processes connect to the breakdown of the peace process. Yeah.
Could you comment perhaps on what this means in terms of the opportunity for more recognition of progressive Judaism, reform and conservative rabbis being able to legally marry people, that kind of thing?
So I would say this helps. Certainly, a lot more Jews today in Israel do not identify with the Orthodox establishment in Israel, with the religious Orthodox establishment. There are more and more Jews, even religious Zionists, by the way, that want to marry outside the Rabbanut, that want to eat in kosher restaurants that have permits not from the Rabbanut, not for the chief rabbinate, that want public transportation on Sabbath. I don't think the struggle is, I mean, it's going to be a long struggle. Unless something very surprising happens, the political constellation that we have now does not allow for it and probably will not allow for it in the next Knesset also. But the voices demanding change are getting louder, and in the long run, I am optimistic. At the end, change will have to come because simply, very basically, more and more Jews, let's say, are not marrying through the chief rabbinate. The state does not have any record of their being married and considers them only common law marriage. That really can't hold too long. So, yeah.
But famous economist Keynes said, we don't live in the long run.
Right.
We live in the short run.
So what can I do?
That's
Yeah.
the crisis.
A couple of weeks ago, Bibi completely outplayed Bennett in a way that was humiliating and many think are damaging to Bennett's political career. How do you see that playing out for the Jewish Home Party? Is Shaked a possibility? She's more extreme even than Bennett.
I will say, again, I will connect this to what I said. The reason that the National Religious Party is in a problem is because many religious Zionists vote Likud. They will vote Likud, and why? This is because, the same as I said, because their nationalist identity or their identification with the State of Israel, with right-winged politics, is stronger for them than their Orthodox identity. And that's why Bennett always is in a problem. And yeah, but the internal politics inside the the Jewish Home Party, I don't know. Yeah.
How would this Jewish-Israeli identity crisis translate into the two-state solution?
I don't know if it would have such a great influence on it. We're of course talking totally hypothetically because we don't have any pragmatic, it's nothing that we need to deal with now. There's no peace plan. I don't know. Jared Kushner is working on one, but I've yet to see it. So, but I don't think there's a direct connection.
You talked about the trend of Haredim moving away from being less on the extreme religious side. But can you also talk about that, at least in the U.S., I'm not sure in Israel, modern Orthodox, the kibbutz are in a way becoming more religious and more extreme, and like kind of religions all over the world, they're moving away from the center.
Well, I would say different things are happening in the U.S. and in Israel. In the U.S., maybe we can say a large part of them, maybe even the majorities, are becoming more conservative politically and a bit more frum. In Israel, that's not the case. In Israel, we have a part, it's maybe 10%, maybe 15% of the religious Zionist public who is becoming more conservative and more frum. These are what we call in Israel the Chardal. They are Haredi Zionists. They're not really Haredi, they're not really ultra-Orthodox, but they are very extreme in their political and halachic views. And they are they have this sort of anti-modern stance. They are, in that way, they are conservative also. But most of religious Zionist public in Israel, 90%, 85% are not there. They are not growing more strict in their religiosity, they're growing less strict. They are becoming, and some of them, as I said, identify vocally as religious light, Orthodox light, right? What they are becoming is more nationalistic. They are becoming more right-winged. So these are two opposite, maybe in complementary movements. The more you are, and this is how it works, the more you are sort of right-winged, patriotic, the more you can be lax on your religious observance, and your family will accept that, and your community will accept that. You're still okay because you are very that.
I will take the last question. Can you comment on what happened to the people who get married without the rabbinical blessing when they get divorced?
So, that's a good question. If they are married Kedat Moshe V'Israel, orthodoxly married, or really if they are married also conservative or reform, they will go to a orthodox or conservative or reform Beit Din, right? They need to go in order to dissolve their marriage. Now, if they're not listed in the chief rabbinate, really they can do whatever they want. They cannot actually go to that Beit Din and just continue their lives. This is the fear of the chief rabbinate and many of the Orthodox, that these people will not get formally divorced. Then the wife will be married to another man who now is a sort of ni'uf, really, and their children will be mamzerim, right? So that's a possibility because they're not listed anywhere. But what they usually will do is try to get a voluntary Beit Din, even an Orthodox one. Maybe they will go to Haredi circles and they will get, like halachically dissolve their marriage. So it's possible.
They can't go and get a civil divorce?
No, they can't. There's no civil divorce in Israel. But if they don't get married halachically or in any denomination, again, that's even not even that's a problem. They just go each their separate way. That's it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
If you don't mind, you may have addressed this issue earlier, and I came late, but the opposition to army service, to IDF service among the Haredi, or the religiously ultra-Orthodox, will that change, and do you see movement in that direction? I know it's a very controversial issue in Israel, and even Lieberman has views about that other than different than some members. Well, he left the government, obviously, but the point is, how important an issue do you see that as making a leavening among the Jews of Israel, and the issue of can one opt out because one is supported theologically by the state for study as a youth?
I see that as an important subject. I think the more ultra-Orthodox get enlisted, it's better for everybody, with certain reservations, but basically. But it's not really going to happen. I mean, there are more and more ultra-Orthodox soldiers, but it's still a minority. It's more, there's importance for the phenomenon, but it's not really as if significant parts of the ultra-Orthodox society get enlisted, and that won't also happen in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll have to clear the room.